Hello out there. There's been a lot of talk recently about, what songs should we be singing in church? What makes an edifying worship set? Should we be concerned about songs from certain groups or certain writers or things like that? So I wanted to put out this video to discuss what I call scripture-shaped worship. And I maybe we'll do a series of this and do different topics. Today, though, I'm going to specifically talk about music. This is something that I'm incredibly passionate about. I am very concerned with a lot of trends that I'm seeing going on in the church, and I would like to ask you, as you watch this talk, to try to have an open mind about the topic. This is a topic that often gets very emotional. It gets very personal. People have a lot of vested interest in it based on either personal connection or emotional connection to material, and so it's very easy to step on toes. But please realize that everything that I'm saying is out of a sense of concern for the body as a whole. It's out of a sense of wanting to be as biblically accurate as possible. I certainly am not intending to just go out there and try to rain on somebody's parade or something like that. Everything is based on quite a deal of study and thought and prayer, so just please accept this with the manner of which is intended, which is to be thoughtful about this topic. So really, when we're asking this question, we're asking, how do we determine what is scripturally appropriate to sing at church, right? That is the big fight right now, or can be a big fight, is, is the song okay? Is the song not okay? Things like that. And I'm going to try to address that, and I'm going to start with some scriptures. So what does scripture say about singing in general? In Colossians it says, "Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom, singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with thankfulness in your hearts to God." Now, in this chapter, Paul is really getting at the matter of the walk and how the walk originates from truth. And when it says, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, that is, truth. That is the sense of reality, the sense of morality that we get from the Bible. And you'll notice that it has teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom, and then it lumps in with that singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, right? So this is natural outgrowth. So it's not necessarily separating the concept of teaching and wisdom with psalms and hymns. In fact, it's putting them very much together. It's lumping them together as part of the way that we express ourselves as Christians. If you look at Ephesians 5, look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is, and do not get drunk with wine, for that is debauchery, but be filled with the Spirit, addressing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody to the Lord with your heart. And unfortunately, I have to cut off Paul there, but he has a tendency to ramble on sometimes, although I love Paul. But the way that this is written, you can see, again, what Paul is doing is he is linking singing and songs with the walk, with being wise. Do not behave like others in the world, right? The reason why we want to be passionate about our worship of God is because we know the truth and we can express that truth. So again, you tie together wisdom and choices with singing. All right. 1 Corinthians 14. What then, brothers, when you come together, each one has a hymn, a lesson, a revelation, a tongue, or interpretation. Let all things be done for building up. So here we have Paul talking about things needing to be in order in a service, right? You don't just all come together and, just do whatever you want. You want to do it for the purpose of building each other up. And this does give the indication that some people will be gifted, with teaching, as it says, a lesson, and an interpretation, revelation, other divine gifts. And then you also have hymn involved as well. So artistic expression through music, through poetry is, again, lumped together with teaching. Now, when you look at the songs in the Bible, right, I'm going to focus on three. The three I'm talking about, and I know the Lord's Prayer is not technically a psalm, so I guess a song. I guess I should say the poetry of the Bible. When we are when the way that people worship God is expressly written about in the Bible. Now, the first one is the Song of Moses. That is the first song that appears in the Bible in a full form. Then, of course, you have the Book of Psalms, which are a bunch of songs, a bunch of a whole collection of poetry. Really shows us what Christian poetry should look like. And you have the Lord's Prayer, which is, again, an indication of how we are to worship God and maybe a way to format these things. So, we can take a look at this for inspiration, but please don't think that this is necessarily going to be some sort of super strict guideline. Don't panic just yet. Just stay with me. So, the Song of Moses commemorates God's deliverance from sin, of course. It's the beginning of the salvation plan in many ways, although, of course, it's been in development from the beginning. But this was the dramatic departure of Egypt, and the Passover, which connects with the sacrifice of Jesus. This is when a lot of the, when the salvation effort really began to come to humanity in many ways. And so this is a big deal, which is one reason why I think this is the original song, right? Exodus 15, I don't think it's happenstance that's the first song we have. This is a dramatic event that is different than what happened previously. It's interesting because, like, Noah comes out of the ark and there isn't like a big song for that. It's when you have the specific part of the plan that connects with the sacrifice of Jesus Christ in that direct way, where you have that, and I think that's very powerful. Now, what are some of the things mentioned? I'm not going to go through the whole song here. I have some of it there on the screen, but I do have a list of some of the different themes that come up in the song, right? God's sovereignty, God's power, God's salvation plan, praise for God, God's violence or wrath against evil, our fear and trembling about God and his power, his triumph over evil, God's love for everybody, God's guidance for everybody, and even some theology. God's eternal nature is mentioned in the song. So there's quite a lot going on here. This is not a shallow song. This has a lot of different themes, a lot of different theological principles, and you'll notice it's just quite rich. All right, so we get to the Psalms, the ultimate collection of biblical written art, right? This is the poetry collection that centers the entire Bible in many ways. It also features the longest chapter, as we commonly modern divide it up. Although, considering the collection of Psalms, you could certainly argue the Psalms is not just some arbitrary human addition. These are independent Psalms, and the chapters are there for that reason. Now, what are some of the different topics of the Psalm? Well, you can see it's all over the place. And you might be surprised at some of the percentages. So, and this is a little debatable, but I didn't make this up. I did base this on a few different scholars and a little bit of my own thought, just to try to clean up some of the categories. But lamenting, 36%, personal forgiveness, 5%, judgment, 5%, salvation, 5%, the law or wisdom together, 17%, God is King, 15%, descriptive praise, 13%. Now, that doesn't mean that a song, that is about lamenting doesn't have praise in it, or doesn't have wisdom in it, or doesn't talk about. Of course, there's overlap. I'm just saying this is the general tone, the general direction of the psalm. And you can see, again, lots of different topics. And surprisingly enough, 41% are how sad we feel, and how much we need God, and how much we need personal forgiveness. So it is a very big portion of the Psalms. It's something to keep in mind. Okay, so then we have the Lord's Prayer, which is the example prayer given by Jesus Christ. It is the strongest written it's the strongest amount of writing about worship in the New Testament, in terms of, that exact wording. You don't really get a lot otherwise. Maybe you could argue some of Revelation, but the Lord's Prayer is it stands on its own as a model of worship in a way that you don't see as much in the New Testament. But again, it really fits into the categories that we've seen up to this point, right? We have praise, we have sovereignty, we have talk about God's kingdom, we have that he is our supplier of, our daily bread, of our sustenance, forgiveness, avoidance of sin, and deliverance. So you can see there's quite a pattern here. There's a pattern of recognizing God's power. There's a pattern of recognizing our need for forgiveness. And then there's a pattern of action mattering, of sin itself, of singing about evil or avoidance of evil, things like that. Those are all part of the biblical pattern of songs that go throughout the entire text. And this is not a very big surprise when it comes to it. The first commandment that Jesus Christ summarizes here, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And a second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And as much as we have, more commandments and more guidelines to help simplify, to detail out the way to keep these commands, there's nothing wrong with going back to the summary statements, and I think this is something to keep in mind when we are singing, right? We need to know, are we singing songs that talk about loving God with our heart, with our soul, with our mind, and are we loving our neighbor as ourselves? Is that something that we're doing through the music? And so we need to keep that in mind. Because, as Paul says, all things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. So when we have freedom to worship God, there's certainly certain things we can't do. We can't build idols, things like that. But when we do have the freedom, not all things are helpful, and not all things build up. And let us not seek our own good, but the good of the neighbor. So we have to think about not only what is going to be edifying for us, but what is edifying for the entire group. What is edifying, for the person next to us in the pew, the other person in the audience. We need to think about everyone from that standpoint. We also need to think, again, what builds up, not just what is acceptable, what builds up. All right, so when looking at this analysis, what I generally got out of this is what songs need to do is they need to convey emotion. We should have an energy because, God's power, we should be responsive to that, right? We shouldn't be apathetic. We should have a response. Now, that's going to vary. Energy can be very focused. It could be a focused energy where people are very, strong and silent, still, and energy can be very loud and obnoxious. It will vary from person to person. So I'm not trying to say that everybody has to become an extrovert. I'm just saying your energy in terms of your emotional investment, needs to be present. You'd want a sense of gratitude and awe, but there's also a sense of fear. Okay? God's presence is scary. God's power is scary. It does not always come with comfort. It does not always come with a pleasantness, right? If the music does not, if the music and the lyrics do not reflect a certain amount of reverence that is maybe a little uncomfortable because it might make us feel small or it might challenge us, I would argue we're probably not heading in the right direction. Certainly when you look at the Song of Moses and the Psalms, there's a lot in there that is difficult to wrestle with. It is quite sharp, right? It is strong. When it comes to mind, worship the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. Again, what we saw in all of those examples was linking singing and wisdom, singing and the right framework, the right moral framework, the right way of thinking. This was all critical. It was linked together. You did not see them separated. So you would expect there to be talk of obedience. There would be talk of some of the principles of wisdom. Certainly there's a lot of Psalms that do that. And theology itself, right? We shouldn't just get our theological principles from a sermon or, you know, a talk, it should come through the music. The Psalms are actually the most quoted book in the New Testament. And that is because the Psalms are rich in theology. And so the apostles and Jesus could quote them and bring forward truths and prophetic statements and concepts about God's nature out from the Psalms, because the people who wrote the Psalms were extremely grounded in theological principles, either, well, I mean, certainly from inspiration of the Holy Spirit, right? And so this is something that we need to keep in mind as well. You would be hard-pressed to create a very good Trinitarian argument from a lot of our music right now, and yet that's a lot of what the New Testament does with the Psalms. So there's something lost there that we should look at. Now, when it comes to awareness, my last category, again, this is looking out for your fellow neighbor. We need to be considerate of others. We need to be considerate of the impact that worship has, especially when dealing with corporate worship, which is really the focus of what I'm talking about today. Obviously, in our personal life, we should still be careful what we listen to, but in the corporate, you know, worship, in a congregational setting, we have to be even more careful, because now we have to be considerate of others. We have to be considerate of what baggage they might be bringing that might affect what the music is going to do to them, what the songs are going to do to them. We're trying to aid them in having a connection with God, right? That's the whole purpose of corporate worship, is for you to be able to meditate and you know, meditate and learn wisdom and get a connection with God through the efforts of the group. Otherwise, what would be the purpose? You can certainly pray on your own. You can certainly have a relationship with God on your own, right? So we come together as a group so that people can facilitate you to have a greater relationship in the same way that a minister would with a really great sermon, right? A really great sermon would give you some insight, something to think about, something to add to your prayer life, maybe some correction in your personal behavior, and you would grow as an outcome. And so there's no reason why singing should not be the same. Otherwise, it doesn't serve much purpose. In fact, it could be a detriment, because if you're singing things and it's very off-putting to people and it makes them feel disconnected, you're actually potentially hurting them. Again, building up. What does that mean? Well, we need to be careful that we are being good stewards of time. You'll notice in Paul's writing, he even mentions time and being good with your time, and then it goes into the way you should behave, and part of that is singing. So we need to be careful that what we're doing is building up, which implies not stagnating, right? Building up is not maintenance. It's building up. It's adding more. So are you really adding more if the content of your songs is not particularly challenging, is not particularly dense, theologically speaking? Probably not. You might just be stagnating. And I would say that is not really the intention. And again, that aiding of connection, right? That's the goal. When you're dealing with a corporate service, you're supposed to be helping them achieve something that they could not on their own, perhaps, because you're going to give them an insight, you're going to give them a different way of looking at things, just like a pastor would giving a sermon. All right, so let's look at the components of songs, and let's try to see how we can accomplish these things. You know, how can we make sure that we're capturing the emotion, capturing the mind, and capturing the awareness? So the components of songs I have is the authorship, you know, who wrote the song, the lyrics, the words of the song, the music, whatever the melody line or, you know, the arrangement of a song, and then how you even perform the song. Those are all 4 components of songs. Pretty straightforward. So, should we pay attention to the authorship of songs? This is a question. There are those who would argue the genetic fallacy. The genetic fallacy goes that Just because an idea comes from a certain place doesn't mean the idea is wrong in of itself. For an extreme example, what if Adolf Hitler had invented a really good chocolate chip cookie recipe? Does that mean you disregard it because Adolf Hitler was Adolf Hitler? And the genetic fallacy argument would say, no, you don't, because it's just good information, and so I can use it. That is the genetic fallacy argument. And there are those that would say we should do the same thing with songs that we use in a worship service. Instead of thinking of the origin source, we should instead think of just the material itself. Now, there is a bit of a problem with that when it comes to worship music, because let's go back to my analogy. It's not quite the same as picking a political extremist's chocolate chip cookie recipes. It's a little bit closer to trying to figure out a political point from a political extremist, right? Because it's what you are concerned about with the person is exactly what you're trying to get out of them. So here is a quote from Extravagant Worship, and this says, the word says that God inhabits the praises of his people. It's amazing to think that God in all his fullness inhabits and dwells in our praises of him. Our praise is irresistible to God. As soon as he hears us call his name, he is ready to answer us. That is the God we serve. Every time the praise and worship team with our musicians, singers, production teams, dancers, and actors begin to praise God, his presence comes in like a flood. Even though we live in his presence, his love is lavished on us in a miraculous way when we praise him. I do not agree theologically with this statement. I do not believe that that God reacts to praise in such a manner necessarily. This is acting, it's the old kind of prosperity gospel, or kind of God is like a gumball machine point, and that is that God has this direct one-to-one ratio where, as soon as we do something, he's kind of forced to respond, almost as if we're kind of putting ourselves as the origin source of things, because we're just constantly, goading God into doing things. And that's a bias that is in this music from some of these groups, and it comes out in the lyrics, and you can tell if you're looking for it. So yeah, that's concerning. Here is another quote. This comes from an article that specifically came out about concern, and this writer specifically was asking people to not ever sing songs from Hillsong, Bethel, Jesus Culture, and Elevation, which is not my position. However, I understand his concern. But he was quoting some works, and he said, this change in theology and music worship led to a new understanding of worship music, perhaps best described by Ruth Ann Ashton's 1993 God's Presence Through Music, raising the matter of musical style to a level of significance that luminaries describe as musical sacramentality, where music is now considered a primary means through which God's presence could be encountered in worship. Again, this is something that we're kind of noticing more and more, right? It used to be that in worship services, you'd gather around, you'd have your red hymnal or whatever, and people would be like, oh, number whatever, number whatever, number whatever. And, it was part of the service, but it wasn't treated as if by singing that you were somehow summoning something, or you were going to put yourself into some sort of state or something like that. And the idea that God's presence can be encountered in worship is certainly true, but God's presence can also be encountered in anything, because God is omnipresent, right? So unfortunately, what is going on is that because there are certain mechanical processes and techniques of emotional manipulation and excitement that comes through worship that is being misinterpreted as supernatural or something spiritual, it creates this false sense that when you're in that state, you're somehow nearer to God's presence than when you're not. It can at least do that, and it's a big concern of mine. It's a big concern of mine because this is generally one way that this becomes sometimes they call it the worship wars. Because you'll end up with one side that claims that their church is really live and active and in the presence of God, and that, fuddy-duddy church down the street, they're all straight-laced singing those old songs from the 1800s. Well, they're just dead. And that's not accurate, right? The people in that church that sings music from the 1800s could be more in the presence of God, more walking in the Spirit than you, right? And I think a lot of people know that. You probably know that. But the concerning thing is that since this is an undercurrent of the music, you will notice that lyrically a lot of this music does point to this sort of theology from these sort of groups, these charismatic influence groups. It will point to a lot of commanding of God and asking of God and obviously we can ask of God, but it is a different sort of, we need to kind of beg him to show up so that way we can experience some sort of ethereal event. And that's not, in my opinion, theologically sound, and it can create a lot of problems. Now, certainly, we can speak to some of the leaders of these groups, like Stephen Furtick of Elevation, who said, the process of discipleship is not God changing you to something else, it's him revealing who you've been all along. And you can find all kinds of quotes from him that are kind of off the wall. He's not particularly theologically sound. There's been a lot of criticism of him, and there's a lot of people who are not comfortable with him. They would want him to come in and teach, but they would be willing to sing songs that he either co-authored or are part of his movement. And the challenging thing with that is to ask yourself, well, how much of this theology is getting mixed in? How much of this framework is? One thing you'll notice is that this does not speak to obedience. Well, guess what? You try to find a song from Elevation Church that speaks to obedience, and you will not, because of the bias of the group. It's very, very difficult. I'll say that. Somebody might come and be like, oh, wait, I found one. Fair enough, but it is difficult and it is not emphasized. Here's a former pastor of Hillsong. We try to be like Jesus. Very rarely did Jesus ever talk about morality or social issues. Now, this pastor is no longer part of them, but I'm bringing this out because when he made these comments, there was not a lot of discipline from the group. He's been later out for other allegations, but you can see again, though, the culture of the group, and that's what I'm talking about. I'm not really picking on these guys to pick on them personally. I'm talking about a cultural difference. There's nothing wrong with being in a different religion than me, except that I don't think you're theologically correct. However, why would I want to give somebody in a different religion than me 30 minutes of my church service time? Isn't that a little strange? Would you expect to have... you would not expect them to come in and speak to you for 30 minutes, right? So what a lot of people do is they assume that, well, we're just going to analyze their works on a one-to-one basis. And fair enough. The issue with that is that, remember, when you use their works, you are giving them money. So that's another issue, and that can certainly trouble some of the members of the congregation. So talking about, loving your fellow neighbor as yourself. How many of the people in the congregation are uncomfortable giving them money? Something to keep in mind. Of course, churches always have to ask that question. We pay rent to all kinds of organizations. We'll buy food from all kinds of organizations. So it's not as simple as that. I'm not trying to make it out that this is incredibly easy to answer. In my opinion, considering the red flags, I don't know what the value is besides that people see a lot of their work as artistically good. But I don't know if that's enough to alleviate all of these concerns, right? And I'm not advocating a blanket ban, but I am certainly advocating caution, right? Now, there's the death to the author principle. Now, this is, again, going back to the genetic fallacy. In literary criticism, death to the author is when you disregard the person who wrote the work and you just look at the work itself and you try to pretend as if the author does not exist. Now, we can't actually do that completely, right? That's not possible. It's not possible to forget things that we know. Now, sometimes we don't know. Like, for example, you could probably pick the hymn "Trust and Obey." Trust and obey. I don't know anything about the person who wrote that. So I don't come in with any knowledge of the author. So that's really easy to do death to the author. So I will say, for those who are advocating a death to the author approach, it's much more challenging right now when these people are currently alive and influencing, and there's a lot of knowledge about their background, and so people might even be reading into songs things that aren't there because they know what their bias is and things like that. But even so, I'm going to challenge anybody out there who says we should use death to the author for these songs, okay? And I'm going to challenge you with this. If somebody from a political party wrote a hymn, would you use it? Now, my guess is you might not, and that's because you would be concerned that by doing so, you would be showing a support for a political cause, and that would make you uncomfortable. Even if it was a political cause you agree with, by the way. So you can't just blatantly use death to the author, I don't think. Now you could say, no, I'm consistent, even if it was a political opponent. If they wrote something and I felt it was biblically true, I would still use it. Okay, fair enough. Let me give another example. How do you examine the Bible? Do you use death to the author for that? And you're like, what do you mean by that? I know it comes from the Holy Spirit. Well, it goes a little bit deeper than that. Don't we use cultural context and who the author is in terms of examining and interpreting Scripture? Now, this isn't to determine what is Scripture, right? That's been canonized. But it certainly interprets our framework, and the Bible itself asks you to do this, doesn't it? For example, Psalm 51, it says to the choir master, a psalm of David, when Nathan the prophet went to him after he had gone into Bathsheba. Just wow. Talk about just coming out with that political scandal, right? But here we have the context for Psalm 51. We are asked to think about the context for Psalm 51 before we read Psalm 51. Now, not every psalm has this sort of context. I'll give you that. But certainly it's hard to argue that we should not think about it at all. Now, you could say, well, I don't really know, this is canonized. I don't really know what was on anybody's mind when they wrote, one of these songs in some of these charismatic churches. And I would argue, well, since I understand their theological background, since I understand the culture of the group, it is going to affect the way that I interpret their songs. And it's certainly going to give me a few red flags. For one, I'm going to be very much looking for signs of obedience, a sign of fear of God versus just a warm presence, but a terrifying presence. I'm going to look for that too. And I'm not saying that none of their songs ever reflect that, but I am going to be looking for that maybe more than somebody else, because I understand they have their bias. Now, I would imagine somebody looking at my stuff would be like, well, I know Daniel, he's very into the law and he's really into obedience, so maybe he's not going to have enough grace in his music. And that would be a fair thing for them to do, right? If they were going to be concerned about my theological clarity when it came to music. Certainly, I don't think I have any issues with the fact that God's grace is absolutely necessary and I cannot get into the kingdom through my works, but, I understand people might have that concern, right? All right, so we've talked a little bit about authorship. Ultimately, in my opinion, you can't use death to the author completely. It's just not possible. And so you will have to factor whether or not the audience is comfortable, and that's something you should take into consideration. And you should also realize that the bias of the writers is going to affect the work. It can't not. I'm giving this talk, and obviously it's affected by my bias to some extent, and I'm sure some of you who are watching it might know what that is, and you're interpreting it that way. Fair enough. Hopefully the data and the evidence will convince you one way or the other. But that's my point. My point is that you can't just pretend that the bias doesn't exist. That doesn't make any sense. Now you can say, despite the bias, it's fine. But we're going to get to that. So we're going to talk about lyrics. Because lyrics is where a lot of this can go sideways. Let's be honest. So what kind of scrutiny do we even give lyrics? I would argue not enough. Not nearly enough, not even remotely enough, at least most people. Now, the reason I say that is because I have seen plenty of people that if somebody puts a toe out of line for things like the way they describe the Trinity, or a certain way of talking about obedience or salvation or things like that, and it's just a phrasing issue, they will be like, well, I don't know if I'd put it that way, I'm not so sure. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That's a good thing, right? We want to be clear. We want to be exact. But what I don't see is that same kind of scrutiny given to lyrics. We tend to give a little bit more of a pass. We're like, well, it's artistic. It's okay, whatever. I just feel like that. I feel like people are much less careful with the word choice. And when it comes to biblical truth, it's a little bit more challenging than just factual accuracy. Let me give an example. So there was a man, and that's not picturing the man, but he was a man, and he had a really great job. He was really successful at it. Everything was going great. And then all of a sudden, he lost his job. It turned out that he just didn't go to work for 2 months, and yeah, he didn't even get out of bed, and he didn't have any chronic mental problem. He just didn't get out of bed, and so he was fired, and then his wife left him. Now, you might be thinking, wow, this man's worse than an unbeliever, right? He's not providing his household. Well, I forgot to tell you, the man actually had a brick fall on his head, and he's in a coma. You can see how leaving out information can dramatically affect your opinion. And nothing I said in that was factually untrue. In fact, I even told you that that's not a representation of the man. And that's also factually true. But I kind of misled you, because why was I showing it to you, right? So you can say a lot of things that are factually true and actually really mislead people. Look at Thomas Jefferson's Bible. Thomas Jefferson's Bible is biblically true. As far as I know, he did not change one scripture. But what he did do is he eliminated, and it's not really a full Bible, it's the Gospels from what I understand. What he did was he eliminated all references of the divinity of Christ and his resurrection. Now, is that the Gospel? Of course it's not. Is it biblically true? Kind of. And see, this is my point. If you are only doing some of the work, you are not actually biblically true. You've got to be careful. And let's go back to what all those verses that we're talking about music did. Did we notice they tied singing in with obedience, with the law, with morality, with a change of behavior? And what did we see was a cultural norm in some of these charismatic groups is a de-emphasis in morality, in behavior. So it's no shock that a lot of this music does not mention it. And it's no shock that that actually ends up creating a false view of Christianity and of God himself. Now, I am not saying that that means that you're worshiping another god or you're actually worshiping Satan or something like that. But what I am saying is that there's an immaturity to it that is very, very dangerous. And it could very well lead you down a very dark path. Certainly, for those of us like me, who are maintaining a stricter standard on some of the things, like, I keep the 7-day Sabbath and I keep the dietary laws and a lot of stuff. You need even more emphasis in order to show the value of maintaining the commandments than some other groups, because we're going against the grain. And really, society is going very much in the direction of, morality is relative, and really, is there an ultimate truth? And so we've got to fight that even harder. So this is not the time to back off on talking about obedience. I don't see the value in that. I don't see the value in that at all. The Great Commission is to go therefore into all the world and preach the gospel and teach them all the things I've commanded you. And you could say, well, that's done during the sermon. Well, remember, the music is very important. And we're going to get to how important music is in terms of how it becomes memorized in your brain. In many ways, music is a more effective way of conveying information than talking. You can you can probably right now do lyrics and get a very good accuracy on many songs. You would not be able to do the same thing for a sermon. It's not even possible. There's no sermon that you're going to be able to give me 3 minutes in a row of exact words. And music, it's very possible you can. It's very possible you can do way more than that. You might be able to do it for hours. So you can just tell that there is a difference. So if this music is allowing us to memorize lyrics, get in, words, these are the words that matter more in many ways. We should be giving the most amount of scrutiny to this. The pastor's got a lot of wiggle room to clarify, to get into nuance. The lyrics got to be spot on, like spot on. Factually correct lyrics can actually paint a false gospel, ultimately. Now, that again, I'm not saying that means, I'm not questioning your salvation. I'm not. Because in spite of this, you can still be fine. I'm just saying, why shouldn't we give you lyrics that will actually get you over the finish line? Why can't we give you lyrics that actually paint the correct view of the way that God operates? That God expects repentance and change and obedience and things like that. Why can't we do that? Of course we can. We've got the time, right? Now, back in the day, people often would literally sing scripture, like the Psalms, right? That is a strategy, right? Well, that obviously solves your problem. If you're just singing Psalms, you are going to present a factually correct view of the gospel. And somebody might say, well, not every Psalm mentions obedience, Daniel. Fair enough, but on average, they certainly do. And if you are only singing Psalms, and I mean, at the length of these songs, like most of these songs are like 2 to 3 minutes. If you sing 30 minutes of them, you'd sing like 10 Psalms. Yeah, you're probably going to get obedience all over the place, because almost all Psalms do. So no, that argument does not actually pass muster. That is a disingenuous argument. If your assumption is that the Psalms do not focus on obedience, I mean, the longest chapter in Psalms is Psalm 119, which is all about the law. So that's not a reasonable argument. There is a variety of topics for sure, but you will notice that even ones that are focused on the law is 17% of them. And that doesn't mean that all the other ones do not include the law. They certainly do. But, imagine if it's 1 out of 4 songs sing about obedience. We're not even remotely close to that a lot of the time. Certainly in my experience, dealing with groups that have adopted a more charismatic style or some of the more, popular canon, as it were, of modern worship music, you don't ever really sing about it. Now, when it comes to lyrics, there are differences in the way that people react to ideas, and there's a different way that people respond to ideas. So there was a study done with men and women, and they created word clouds, and they created word clouds over the words that one gender used more than the other, right? So just on average. This is on average. This is not saying anything about, differences that, people that don't follow these patterns. I'm just speaking of groups, right? These are the 2 major groups of humans. So let's look at them. So when we have the women, we have things like loving, beautiful, love you, wonderful, love him, my heart, love them. You can see that women, on average, are willing to use these sort of words more than men. Now, that doesn't mean men should never say love. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying on average, this is a comfort level. What does the men cloud look like? Yeah, it looks like a rough place. One thing you'll notice is a lot of profanity, particularly the F word. Now, the reason why that is because men generally are more comfortable not only talking about sex, but it tends to be something that is more on their mind. You can argue that the male sex drive is different than a woman in terms of the specific intensity of it and the prevalence of it, because men have to always be ready for sex in a way that women are not. And so just biologically, it's different. But let's eliminate sex for the moment. We'll get to it. But we have other things like, competition. Men talk a lot more about competition directly. They talk more about violence directly. They talk a lot more about politics directly. These are some of the things that men speak of more than women on average. Now, again, my point is not necessarily to make a big deal about this because maybe you're a woman and you relate to these things. My point is that the church is ignoring a lot of these topics. When do you sing about political control, like, God's kingdom in that way? Maybe sometimes, but, how often do you do that? How often do you sing about competition? How often do you sing about systems, which would be laws and rules? How often do you sing from the standpoint of sexual drive? And you're like, what? When would you ever do that? Well, let's look at the Psalms and let's see what happens. So the Psalms, this is about the heavens declaring the glories of God. Their voice goes throughout all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them he has sent a tent for the sun. So you got this power, this glowing, astronomical orb, which comes out like a bridegroom leaving his chamber. So we have, the power of God being associated with, a man fulfilling a sexual act with his new wife. So that's very strong metaphor going on there that resonates. A strong man running its course with joy. Again, we have competition mentioned, right, as the metaphor. Nothing hidden from its heat, again, power. And then the law of the Lord is perfect. We have the system, wise the simple. Again, we have, a call to wisdom and obedience. This is very different in terms of its metaphor choice, its word choice, its style, than what you'll find a lot of the time. Now, what I've noticed is that a lot of the modern songs do tend to skew a little bit more traditionally feminine, but actually they skew almost kind of genderless. They don't tend to use a lot of words that really speak to anybody. And I think that's part of the general trend of kind of an androgynous society, which I don't think is positive. I think, unfortunately, it's been kind of sucked into that trend. Now, if we sang My Soul Among Lions, we would sing that directly. The golden sun awakes its beauty as it rises from his place, like a bridegroom from his chamber, like a strong man runs a race. So the sun will not be silent, but he rises every day to proclaim your matchless glory through every glowing ray. Which is a very nice, rhyming way of doing it. Very, a little simplified, but certainly gets the same sort of metaphors across. And some strong symbolism for a different audience than tends to be hit by a lot of modern worship music. Now, that being said, I am not advocating that all songs must be scripture, because the Bible doesn't advocate that, in my opinion. It does say, oh, sing to the Lord a new song, sing to the Lord all the earth. So I don't think that songs can't continue to be written. I think that would be a mistake. However, I don't understand why we would want the new songs to be written by theologically immature people that are from cultural groups that are of a different religious mindset. That doesn't make a lot of sense. That seems like giving a lot of power to somebody that frankly doesn't deserve it. Not in your local congregation. Again, if you wouldn't give them a 30-minute sermon, I don't see why you give them a 30-minute worship time, right? Now, that being said, when somebody writes new material, what should they do? Well, I think they can look to the Psalms, and if you go back this video, you can see a lot of the different topics and a lot of the different approaches the Psalms use, and the Song of Moses, and even the Lord's Prayer, to figure out, a biblical style of song for corporate worship. Now, this is very different than what you might listen to at home just because, right? Jesus Takes the Wheel is a beautiful song. I wouldn't say that's really a corporate worship song, right? It's a story song, and it's got a good metaphor. But to me, that doesn't really feel like a corporate worship song. It doesn't really, to me, reflect a biblical sort of song. And I would think a lot of people would agree with that. So I would say, go back to the Bible, try to get that sort of framework and mindset, and keep in mind your audience. Now, that being said, if you are going to write a new song, I will give Jesus Take the Wheel the credit that it's set in modern times, and it uses modern analogies, right? A modern analogy of a black ice in a car hitting it, and that's not something that the psalmist had at their fingertips, right? And you'll notice that for all of the creativity that is made such a big to-do over, it's like, wow, isn't it great that we have all these new Christian artists writing stuff? I don't see a lot of great new metaphors or analogies that are relatable to me in the modern context. So what are we doing? It says, oh, sing to the Lord a new song. It doesn't say, oh, sing to the Lord a new rehash of already existing biblical metaphors that were already done better. If you're just going to do that, why don't we just sing the Psalms, right? If you don't have anything new to say, why don't we just sing the Psalms? I don't quite understand. Lyrics directly mentioning obedience, like I said, are very, very hard to find. And the question that we need to ask ourselves every time we pick a song is, what is the advantage to an earworm song that does not directly quote scripture, that is not a direct adaptation similar to the My Soul Among Lions, technique? Now, there are other people, Shane and Shane is an example, that quote Psalms kind of. What you'll notice, though, is they usually remove the obedience because of the bias. They'll remove obedience, or they will remove some of the heavy-hitting stuff, some of the tougher stuff to deal with, like God's wrath or fear of God. They tend to be more soft and, uplifting in a kind of a shallow way, because honestly, I find it very uplifting that one day God's judgment is going to destroy evil, because evil needs to be destroyed. And you might say, well, that's kind of rough. It is kind of rough, but this world's a rough place, and I'm an adult. I can handle it, right? You don't have to coddle me. The Psalms certainly don't. They're very rough. They're very tough-hitting. Much tougher and much more true than a lot of the lyrics we see nowadays. Much more true to life. Much more relatable, in my opinion. Now, when it comes to modern worship, we have an issue with content. So if I were to take the Barney Greatest Hits album, the amount of unique words we'd get per minute would be 21. So that means I take how many unique words are in the song and I divide it by the amount of time. One reason why is that Barney songs don't tend to last all that long. Now, that being said, they are fairly repetitive because they are designed for toddlers. They're designed to be easy to sing. Nobody can really defend that Barney is tough or challenging. However, that being said, worship music tends to be much, much less dense. It's by far the least dense music you will find in the modern era, by a significant margin. It's not even remotely close. You'll have songs like 8 unique words per minute, when the average for an adult song, song for adults would be like 25 to 30 and more depending on the tempo. But let's say you do slower tempo, 25, 30 is pretty normal, and yet you'll have 8. Now, what's going on, right? What is the biblical basis of singing songs with less content than secular songs for toddlers? Does this build up? Is this really loving your fellow neighbor? Because there are a fair amount of people, maybe their mental processing is quicker, maybe they have ADHD, maybe they just appreciate deeper content, and you're not allowing them to enjoy themselves. Their mind's going to wander. They're going to find it harder to connect. They're going to be irritated. I mean, you can see the memes out there. There's a lot of people that don't like it, right? So how is it loving our neighbor to force them to do something they don't like? And I don't know what percentage of the audience it is, but maybe we should find out. And how many people does it have to be? Because what's it to you if you don't do it? You can do it at home. The corporate service should be a place where we do a lot of compromising for the bigger group, right? So what's it to you not to do it exactly? What is the biblical basis for singing songs with less content, right? Now, here is an argument that you will sometimes hear. And this is Revelation 4:8. And this is where the seraphim, pictured there, I love the seraphim, pretty awesome. Although not the only kind of angel. You'll see memes that say that, and that's not accurate. And the 4 living creatures, each of them with 6 wings, are full of eyes all around and within, and day and night they never cease to say, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come." So the argument would go something like this. Because there are these creatures, angelic entities that look like that, singing all day long and whatever, that therefore the Bible is trying to say that repetition is a good thing. Okay, there's a couple of problems with that. One, the same type of people that would tell you to try to take this completely literally, and just complete face value, day and night they do it, never, there's no revelation. No, that's not a reasonable argument, because Revelation is rarely treated completely literally all throughout. And the same people, the charismatic types, the types that are, in my opinion, trying to avoid singing scripture or are not as concerned with singing scripture, I'll say that, either one, they're not generally that comfortable with saying much in Revelation is literal at all. In fact, they usually try to make as much of it not literal or already happened or things like that. So it's not really a good faith argument for them to say, well, this one bit is literal and therefore we need to take some sort of doctrinal application when the rest of it is not. I just don't see that. The other thing is these are seraphim, right? So if the seraphim, and I'm going to go with their argument. I'm going to say, because the Bible tells us what, this heavenly realm is like, okay? That's how we should model our singing. Fantastic. I'm going to go with you. But I'm not going to model myself after seraphim because I'm not a seraphim. I'm a human being. So what does it say? Psalm 27. One thing that I have asked of the Lord, that I will seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple. Okay, inquiry is not repetition. Inquiry is growth. Inquiring is questions and answers and change. There is very little in the Bible to indicate that the gospel is a gospel of stagnation. The issue with repetition is that it is stagnation. Now, there's a certain amount of stagnation that is needed in order to reach a greater level. It's like practice, right? You practice, 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 and then you level up. Fair enough. But if you're just practice the same exact thing, you might just get carpal tunnel syndrome, right? That's not necessarily going to give you growth, or you're going to not be very well-rounded. You're going to be very practiced in one muscle group and nothing else. So the idea that repetition is a biblical concept, that because of that one verse in Revelation, well, that's not our journey, right? If we're presenting the gospel message in our music, and that's the point, right? We're supposed to be, in my opinion. At least I think so. Maybe that's the disagreement right there. But if we're trying to either show off what the afterlife is going to be like, get a little taste of that on earth, or if we're trying to bring the gospel message to people, again, it's a message of growth. It's not a message of stagnation. Grow in the grace and knowledge of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. To him be the glory both now and to the end of eternity. Amen. Right? We have an eternity of growth to look forward to. Isn't that a wonderful thing? Imagine if eternity was just stuck in a time loop like Doctor Strange. That's horrible. And that's not what we're going to have. We're going to have eternal growth because you know what? God is always going to be greater than me. Up to infinity. It's not possible for me to ever reach him. So even if I'm getting closer, I'm growing in the grace of knowledge of God, that's a never-ending process. And that's a wonderful idea. And that's not represented with repetition. That's represented with change and growth. So I would argue from that standpoint, it isn't. Now, again, from the biblical standpoint, let's look at the actual way that poetry is written in the Bible, which is also not very repetitive either. The most repetitive psalm, which is Psalm 150, does not have any repeated lines. It alternates, or this one isn't alternating, I'm sorry. Psalm 136 is probably the most repetitive in the Bible because it constantly says, his mercy endures forever, his mercy or his love endures forever, or whatever. But you'll notice it goes back and forth. And even if you sing that song at a normal rate, you could take like 6 minutes and sing that song and you'd still be 20 unique words per minute, no problem. This one is the most difficult one. In order to get 20 unique words per minute, you'd need to sing it in about 2 minutes. But it's also not very long. But you also notice that it uses repetition for a purpose. It uses it to build in the same way that Psalm 136 does. It does not repeat just for repetition's sake. It's a repeat to go up and a repeat to go up and a repeat to go up. And so, in my opinion, I'm not saying you can never have repetition in music, but if you want to follow the biblical poetry example, you would want to repeat to go up, repeat to go up. You would not want a lot of repeated lines in a row. It's just not something you ever find. Now, you could say, well, that's not a poetic device they used back in the Bible, but we can use it nowadays. Fair enough, but then I go back to my question of what is the biblical reason why you want to be more repetitive than Barney? What's the scientific reason you want to be biblically better than Barney? Oh, we'll get to that in a moment, because I have a theory about that. All right, so anyway, yeah, we had praise him for his mighty deeds, praise him according to his excellent greatness, praise him with trumpet sound, praise him with lute harp. It goes back and forth with all the different things, right? There's a lot of praise him with this, praise him with that, but it's different things. It is not completely repetitive. And this is, again, the most repetitive section you will find in the entire Bible. that I'm aware of. Now, when it comes to why I think people do this, I think it's for this scientific reason. This is from the Mayo Clinic's article about hypnosis. Hypnosis, also referred to hypnotherapy or hypnotic suggestion, is a trance-like state in which you have heightened focus and concentration. Hypnosis is usually done with the help of therapists using verbal repetition and mental images. When you're under hypnosis, you usually feel calm and relaxed and are more open to suggestions. Now, I am not going to stand here and say that worship leaders are intentionally creating mass hypnosis. That would not be fair, because I know for a fact that is not the case. However, I believe that worship leaders are unintentionally creating mass hypnosis, and that is because they are doing the process in which hypnosis takes place because other people did that, and they got this result of people feeling calm and relaxed and open to suggestions, and did not realize that this wasn't from the spirit, but this is just a normal phenomenon of the human brain that you can do by using repetition and certain types of music and that sort of thing, and you can create that sort of effect. And this is the real danger, right? I don't necessarily even have a problem with a church using hypnosis in a worship service as in a sense, and that may sound kind of controversial. But my issue is not that they're doing that. My issue is that they're doing it and then they're being deceptive about it unintentionally or intentionally at times, because the audience is under the impression that this calm and relaxed and this heightened focus sort of state that they're getting is somehow a supernatural effect, when it is actually a scientific effect. In the same way that I wouldn't recommend a speaker who goes to Toastmasters go to the stage and be like, wow, thanks to the Holy Spirit, I'm giving a great message, because it was probably the fact that they spent a lot of time honing in on psychology and how to persuade people in conversation, how to give a compelling speech that did that. So that really wouldn't be reasonable for them to say. And so the same thing happens. Now you try going up to somebody and claiming this. You are going to get completely bashed to the wall, because people want to believe that this is some sort of supernatural effect. And for some reason, churches for thousands of years, or at least in America, a few hundred years, when they weren't using these sort of techniques and they weren't achieving this sort of effect, I guess we're just not under the influence of the Holy Spirit. I don't know. Because, the old hymns back in the 1800s would not have achieved the same sort of psychological effect. Now, I'm not saying that they're not positive. Of course they are. But, they're not going to hypnotize you in the same way. They're not designed to do that. And again, I'm not saying it's intentional, but it is designed to do that. It's just, you can do something and not realize it. Just like, you can be under the influence of gravity and not realize it, and then make adjustments on it and not even know physics. You can have a general sense, right? And that's what's happening. People do things and they experiment and they get the response they want from the audience, and then they keep doing it, and then they've fallen into this idea. One thing you'll notice, this is something that's come out in interviews from people, people that show up late to a service and they don't see that first segment, that worship segment. It's like, wow, it was weird. It was like, the Spirit wasn't with us today or something. And it's because they did not get this effect. There's also a lot of people that it just doesn't work on, like me. I'm not very prone to hypnosis. For one, I could see it coming a mile away. I've seen plenty of stage hypnotists. I've read about the subject. I know the techniques. So it's very hard to do it for me because I'm aware of what you're doing. I have to allow you to do it, and I'm not going to do that because I don't like the idea. I don't need to be in a calm and relaxed state. I like my mental faculties where they are. So because of that, you kind of end up as the one sober person where everybody else is in this heightened state, and it's very strange. And I'm not the only person, because I look around and I see other people. But what are we supposed to do? Because we've been told that this comes from the Spirit. So for us to challenge it creates a terrible rift where now we have to challenge that not only is something that you think is from the Spirit, not from the Spirit, but you don't even know what the Spirit sounds like. And that's a horrible place to put somebody in, because who wants to be the bearer of that kind of news? And again, I'm not saying if you like to be hypnotized, there's no biblical there's nothing in the Bible, in my opinion, that says that you can't be. Although, you could say be sober-minded means you shouldn't do it. Fair enough. But I mean, that's a personal matter. I'm not going to dwell on that. I'm talking about corporate time. In corporate time, don't try to hypnotize me. Here's some more thought about repetition. This comes from Elizabeth Helmuth Margulis, who is an expert in how music affects the brain. And this comes from her book, On Repeat. There are clear biological rationales for experiencing pleasure when predictions are fulfilled, as David Huron explores in his 2006 book, Sweet Anticipation. Such pleasures can be understood to reward successful prediction and encourage more of it in the future. Familiar music can have a transportive quality, part of which may relate to the special way that surrounding events and sensations can seem to glom onto musical experiences. Excuse me, such that when we rehear familiar repertoire, vivid episodic memories arise. We all have examples of a commercial jingle or radio song summoning forth a forgotten memory from childhood as suddenly as distinctly as if no time had passed at all. Music, especially repetitive music, is incredibly powerful. So if you are going to use a lot of repetitive stuff, this would be the moment to use scripture more than ever, because you're talking about making some sort of indelible memory. And you want it to be somebody who comes from a church that is theologically a little bit questionable. You want them that deep in your mind. That's an interesting strategy. I don't agree. I'm not comfortable with that. I'm very concerned. Rereading or rehearing, excuse me. To take a close example, familiar poetry, I would argue, a less consuming experience than rehearing familiar music. I would agree with that. I think you all would too. If you love Robert Frost, you don't hear Two Roads Diverge and think, yes, the way you might when you hear the opening notes of a favorite song. Yeah, absolutely. You could duck out of the poem fairly easily, whereas a snippet of familiar music cascades a cascade of that song that takes over and won't let you go. Interestingly, it's much harder to memorize a poem than a song. Exactly. We all know that it is much harder to memorize scripture just on its own than it is to memorize a hymn. It's not even close. At least for most people. There might be some exceptions. At first glance, this would seem to make repetition more desirable for poems than music, where we are able to know how it goes much quicker. That the reverse is true suggests that the pleasure we derive from musical repetitions might stem from increasing knowledge about the piece than from a growing sense of inhabiting the music, a transportive, even transcendent kind of experience. Indeed, recent theoretical work by Carolyn Abbott has questioned the centrality of knowing within musical experience, emphasizing instead its momentary lived and sense aspects. So, I mean, these are scientists talking about this fixation that your mind can have. So this is very, very important stuff, okay? We cannot take this lightly. The power of music is strong. And I think that's one reason why God commands us to use it, is because he knows it's such a valuable tool, right? But it's a valuable tool for what? It's a valuable tool to convey information about theology, convey information about wisdom, convey information about truth, not just convey information about comfort. Now, here are some arguments that you'll get sometimes. Won't it be too hard to sing songs with more lyrics? No, because plenty of modern songs do have a lot more lyrics, and the classic hymns did, and they were not particularly hard to sing. In fact, many times, classic hymns are easier to sing because the meter is consistent, whereas in modern songs, you don't quite know where to pause, it's sometimes syncopated and things like that. Some people say, well, memorizing helps you learn and memorize. Fair enough, but memorize what? If you're talking about repeating a scripture over and over again, I wouldn't have nearly the same issue with that. And guess what? It's less likely you're going to find a scripture that's going to give you the sort of hypnotic effect because of the specific words. It's harder for the band to learn. Well, I mean, the music doesn't have to change for there to be more lyrics, and obviously you can have lyrics sheets, you can have slides, and the idea that bands are stupider in worship services than they are in the secular world, That's not very nice. If secular bands can do it, why can't worship bands do it? And then the argument is it's more emotional. Who in the world would say that secular music is not emotional? That would be a ridiculous claim. Certainly, like songs like Butterfly Kisses, which are dense, or The Cat's in the Cradle, or, you know, whatever, American Pie, or whatever. There's a lot of emotional songs in the secular world. So the idea that it's more emotional, I think when they say that, what they're saying is it's more hypnotic. And yes, that's true, but then the argument is should we be hypnotizing people? And the second one is, if we are hypnotizing them with what? Now, when it comes to music, what style of music? Like, we've talked about the lyrics. What is the style? Well, you'll notice that this is where it gets very strange. Because the same people that will be like, oh, freedom, artistic choice, don't be so judgy, will be very narrow-minded in terms of what kind of style of music. In fact, it went from everything has to be 4-part harmony with a piano and organ sounding like it came from the 1800s, to everything has to have this sort of ethereal adult contemporary sound. Now again, the reason for this adult contemporary ethereal sound, it's not by accident. It just so happens that this type of music is more prone to get you into some sort of trance-like state, which is why it has that effect on the audience, which is why they continue to use it, etc., etc. Now, again, does that mean you can't use that style of music? No. But for what purpose? And the question is, why are we so narrow-minded on this? Why don't we have songs that sound like Respect, or Boogie Woogie Boogaloo, or Take Me Out to the Ball Game, or Rock Around the Clock, or Mac of the Night, or This Lane's No I Can Get No Satisfaction? Like, why not? Is there something inherently wrong with the style of these songs? I'm not talking about the lyrics, just the style of the songs. And if it is, what is it? And what does that say about what you think worship should look like? You know, what does that say about your relationship with God? If you're like, I don't know, can I really praise God with a song that sounds like this? And what does it say about you that you're willing to sing secular songs in a style that you wouldn't praise God in? Because that's weird too. If it's somewhat immoral, which would be, in my opinion, one of the reasons why you wouldn't want to use it for God, well, why would you listen to it anyway? Just, you know, just as a tune. I'm not talking about the lyrics. Now, the Psalm 150, that repetitive psalm, it's repetitive with a reason. It tells you all different kinds of music, trumpets, lutes, tambourines, cymbals. This is a variety of instruments, so we can get that, right? I don't think we need to be narrow-minded about that. Now, does that mean that, therefore, you should be okay with heavy metal? Not necessarily. You do have to love your fellow neighbor. If your fellow neighbor would be off-put by it, weirded out, they would feel it very distracting or disrespectful, you do have to take that into consideration. The one challenging thing, though, is that the same people that would tell you, well, you can never do a rap song, or you can never do a heavy metal song, if you said, well, I really don't like Hillsong music, I think it sounds terrible and it's really off-putting, be like, well, that's your problem. So it's very inconsistent. You do not get a consistent response because there's some idea of what people want, which is based on no information, since nobody's really ever surveys anybody, and nobody can really bring it up because you bring up anything to a worship leader and they fall to a million pieces because they are so emotionally invested in it. Because it's a very difficult thing. Like, you're going to tell somebody that, wow, you know, you tried to get me to connect with God and you failed miserably. How do you do that nicely? I mean, obviously you don't say it like that, but how do you do that nicely? It's really hard, because you either have to be so vague as to not really give them your concern, or you're going to really make them offended. And they never ask for it. When does a worship leader ever say, hey, is our style of music working for you? Anybody hate it? Anybody just despise our music style and like to change? I mean, that's not a bad idea. Why not? Why not ask that question? Because you might get an answer, and that might not be an answer you want, but it might be a good one. It might be a good question to ask. Now, in the Psalms, it says, make melody to him on the harp of the 10 strings, sing to him a new song, play skillfully on the strings with loud shouts. And you could argue, well, what does skillfully mean? It does mean that talent involving music can be used, right? It also means that simplicity is not something that necessarily God rewards. So be careful with that. Now, does that mean, therefore, you need to sing the most complex music ever? And if you're not the most talented person, that you're doing something wrong? No, I'm not saying that. I am saying, though, that there is an argument often that, simple is best or something. Maybe not. Excuse me. It doesn't necessarily have to be. And if you're like, well, it needs to be singable for the audience because you need to, again, love your fellow neighbor. You need to do something accommodating for them. That's fair enough. But keep in mind, if you want to talk about repetition, maybe you could repeat a song that's very complicated versus repeating the same line over and over again, and the people would learn it. There's some synagogue medleys that Jews do every single week that are pretty complicated, but because they do them so frequently, the audience knows them. So just something to keep in mind. How do we perform worship music? This is the last section. We've talked about where we get it from and the lyrics and the music, but does the performance matter? And I would say yes, it does. The performance does matter. It's not just a matter of the material, it's a matter of how we are presenting it as well. And there generally tends to be two extremes that develop, right? Either people think you have to be all, oh shucks, I'm really not that good, and if it's all about God, it can't be about me like whatsoever in terms of I can't say I have any talent and I can't make it look good for myself. Yeah, and that's a bit much, right? That's not really real. We can be truthful. If we have a beautiful voice, we can sing out with a beautiful voice. There's nothing, humility in the Bible is recognizing reality. It's not a matter of undermining your own ability. That's a lie, if you're good at something. On the other hand, you don't want to be puffed up. You don't want to be like, well, look at me. I'm the center of attention, and I'm actually going to distract you from the lyrics. I'm going to distract you from the content because I'm going to riff and I'm going to go this way and that way, and it's going to become so much about my performance that the substance goes away. And certainly we see this in the secular world too, like with the national anthem, right? Some people give us a really stirring version of the national anthem, and it's great. It's beautiful. And there's other people that you're like, they really think they're all that in a bag of chips, don't they? And it's really off-putting. So there's a balance there, right? There's a balance. We don't have to be all wallflowers, and we don't have to be the center of attention. And we also need to be careful about how we react to others. It's very common for people to mock those that are more withdrawn. They're not the ones that are jumping up and down during singing, maybe even seated and kind of quiet and whatever. And the idea that they're lesser spiritually or anything, we don't really know. I mean, unless we hear their story, there's no reason to assume that, right? Some people just aren't as extroverted. There's nothing to demand that. That's one really dangerous thing about some of this charismatic theology, especially this, praising God and then he responds, is that you get this idea. It's like, well, if I'm not really putting myself out there, if I'm not like setting myself on fire, God's not going to respond. And that's not biblically accurate. You can worship in silence, in a sense. So no, that's not true. On the other hand, people who are really out there and extroverted and energetic can sometimes be off-putting to people who don't quite understand what's going on. And they can think, wow, those people really are trying to get attention for themselves, or they're crazy, when they are just kind of in the moment and they are connecting to the material. So we have to be careful about that as well. And the Bible shows us both examples. So for example, in Matthew, Jesus says, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and the streets, that they may be praised by others. So yes, if we're drawing the attention to ourselves, that we're like, wow, you're really such a righteous person because you're just so into it. If somebody tells you that, be careful, because you might be falling into this trap. Now, it could be that somebody's just saying, wow, it was really inspiring to see how much you were focused on it or whatever. Fair enough. But if somebody's doing that, I would be concerned that perhaps I'm falling into a trap that I'm actually showing it externally so much that I'm trying to get that attention. Just be careful. If you're not, and there are people that do it, even people that claim they're not. There are people that will say, oh yeah, I'm just praising God. No, they're not. They're trying to get attention for themselves. Come on. But we have to, in my opinion, take the benefit of the doubt. This verse is not for us to judge others. This verse is for the person to judge themselves, in my opinion, within a certain amount of reason. And then we have David, who danced before the Lord, and he said, you know, it was before the Lord who chose me above your father and above all this house to appoint me as prince for Israel, the people of the Lord, and I will celebrate before the Lord. I will make myself yet more contemptible than this. You know, because she didn't like what he was doing. And he's like, well, I'm going to even do more. Now you could argue, well, was this really David speaking from the best way? Personally, I am inclined to think that David was in the right in this situation. I know it's a little bit nebulous, but the point of if you want to take it as nebulous, it's still nebulous, right? We need to be careful about how we judge how other people are worshiping, in a sense. And that kind of brings us full circle to the whole beginning of this, right? My goal is not to try to just paint people into a corner. My goal is to raise questions and concerns, because I am very concerned. I'm very concerned about, you know, giving 30 minutes of our time to dodgy theology. I am concerned about a lack of respect of scriptural lyrics. I am concerned about songs that do not reflect biblical poetry in style or substance. You know, I am concerned that the people who are concerned are getting squashed and silenced and ridiculed. You know, there's the whole point that comes out. It's like, well, if you didn't like our worship, at least we weren't worshiping you, which is a horrific thing to say, and nobody should ever say that. Because that's not the point. The point is this is a corporate service. So in a sense, it was for that person. It's supposed to help them. It's not supposed to be a stumbling block for them. If they are troubled by what you are doing, then you should listen. Now, that doesn't mean you have to agree, but it's not a matter of, well, at least this wasn't for you. Because it was in many ways. It's a corporate event. We're doing this together. What that shows is a hatred for your fellow man. It shows that you do not care about them, that you are going to disregard their opinion. And this is the kind of attitude you get from worship leaders a lot, unfortunately. And it does make it look like they're not in it to try to make a corporate worship environment that is edifying for the whole group. It makes it look like they're making it an edifying experience for those who agree with them. And you could argue, well, everybody agrees with them except for the dissenter, you know. But I'm not so sure about that, because I hear the phone calls. I've had men call me, you know, crying, upset because they feel alone, and these are, you know, these are not weak people, and they don't know what to do because they're told that they're weak and they are not biblically minded and they're not spiritual enough because they disagree on these issues. I've seen the hatred firsthand when you push these issues. There's something deep-rooted here, and it needs to be dealt with. So that being said, let's imagine you are dealing with it, okay? What are some of the deceptive things that people say? I'm going to get a little bit feisty here. And I don't mean deceptive as in, I said that instead of lies, because these are things that I think people believe, and sometimes I think they're self-deceived. You know, they don't understand the issue, right? And so but it is a major problem. So I'm going to go ahead and say these are deceptive things that people say. One of them is, it's not that important to me. Yes, it is. If anybody tells you that, they're not being honest. And I'm not saying they're deliberately being dishonest, but they're not being honest. Not being important to you is something like the difference between McDonald's and Burger King or something, although that might be important to you. But, you know, if you're like, I don't really care where we go, that's not the case. If that were the case, you know what would happen? As soon as you raise an issue, they're like, oh, well, since that's not important to me, we'll just do that. Because that's what you do when something's not important to you, right? If it's not important to you, you're just like, oh, well, it's important to you. It's not to me. So we'll just do it your way. Why not? That's easy. I do that all the time. Everybody does that all the time. So it is important to them. They'll say, why are you being divisive? It's not you that's being divisive. It takes two to be divisive, right? If you bring up an issue with somebody and then they disregard it, or if you bring up an issue with them and they say you're wrong, that's the division. But you're not being divisive. You're just pointing out the difference of opinion, right? You didn't create the divide. The divide was created because there's a disagreement. And if there wasn't a disagreement, well, there would be no division. So it's not your fault. This is a blaming of the person bringing up a potential issue that is not merited. And it is a deceptive tactic. Now, I'm not saying that people can't bring up stuff like this just to be difficult or just to get somebody in trouble or things like that. But if you're bringing it up because of legitimate theological concern, that's not the same thing as being divisive. That's just disagreeing. And honestly, they could agree with you and then there wouldn't be a division, right? So why are they being divisive? Because they're the ones that are doing something different as well, right? It goes both ways. No one agrees with you. This is another one. You'll get this sometimes because people want to undermine your point. Well, the truth of the matter is I don't know how many people agree with a lot of the tactics that are being done. I'm not fully convinced. There are situations in life that end up becoming an emperor has no clothes situation. And this is very similar in terms of the style. In that story, people pretended to see clothes because they did not want to be judged as being a certain, uncouth in that culture. And so they all pretended, and then it turned out the emperor had no clothes, and the kid was like, he doesn't have any clothes on. And then everyone realized it. When you have a system that is designed that tells you, and we saw the material about how this sort of praise connects us with God in a way that other praise does not. When you have people telling you that this music connects them with God in a way that you don't get, you end up creating a situation in which people would be compelled to not be honest. Now, I'm not saying that that is therefore what everybody is doing. I'm not. I think a lot of people legitimately like it. There might even be people that are legitimately getting some sort of spiritual connection. I'm not claiming that. But what I am claiming is this is certainly the environment in which that sort of problem would manifest itself, because honesty is not being rewarded. You are not being rewarded if you bring up legitimate concerns. There is no way of vetting. We're supposed to test every spirit. There's no way of vetting that right now. If you say, well, I'm not so sure you were connected to the Holy Spirit because the theology of that song was messed up, so that doesn't make a lot of sense. That's just, that's just, you might as well put a nail in your coffin. And you'll be ostracized, you'll be ridiculed, you will be, and everyone knows you can't talk about this. It's a taboo topic. It's just obvious, because every time you bring it up, people lose their mind. And so, if you want to make a scenario in which you can, if you wanted to make a scenario in which you would see a lot of agreement that is forced, this would be a good one. So, I don't know how many people are in that situation. I don't know if it's I don't know if it's 2%. I don't know if it's 20%. I don't know if it's 50%. I don't know, but I know it's not nobody. I know it's not nobody, and I know it's a lot more than a lot of people think. And if you're watching this and you want to feel, if you want to feel empowered about that, realize it's a lot more than I think you think. And I think we need, and those of us that are concerned, I think need to be more vocal about it. It's hard, I understand. There's really not an elegant way of bringing it up, because it's insulting to the people that are having this experience. And it's hard, but it's like you either do that or I don't know, because I don't know what comes next. All right, we want to attract a diverse audience. This is another one. Oh, you do you? I remember that restaurant down the street. They decided they wanted to attract a diverse audience. You know what they did? They served French fries every single day, and only French fries. Does that make sense? Of course it doesn't. No, this is not correct. The way you attract a diverse audience is not by just doing the same thing all the time. If you're saying, wow, why can't we throw in an occasional scripture song? Or maybe we could do a different style of music. And they're like, oh, no. Some people wouldn't like that. We want to attract a wider audience. That doesn't make any sense. That doesn't operate anything like anybody in the regular world. Have you ever, if you go to if you go to a secular event, you know what you will hear? You will hear all kinds of music, especially if it's one for a diverse audience. You'll hear music from the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and country and reggae, and it'll change all the time. You know why? Because somebody will realize, oh, I hate this song. Oh, this song's okay. Oh, I hate this song. Oh, okay, this song's okay. And that's what happens to you, right? This is trying to pick the safest thing possible and then going with it, which is not usually a very good tactic for attracting a diverse audience. It's a very good tactic, though, for maintaining a specific thing, which is what this is all about. It's about maintaining a specific style of worship that has become a sacramental sort of process where we reach this kind of enlightened trance-like state, and that must be protected. You are too strict. This is another one. Oh, really? Who's the stricter one? The one that wants to have some change, some diversity, some adjustments to not do things the same way, or the people that have discovered the way to create a emotionally manipulative event and want to repeat it over and over again? It's obviously the latter, and you can tell that really easily. Who's the one that's going to be less, you know, if you try to get even a compromise, it's almost impossible, because a compromise would break the system. A compromise would break the whole effect that what is currently being achieved. Not to mention, if you're talking about strictness as in, you know, I want to sing more scripture, isn't that a very weird place to come from? Isn't that a strange sort of standard? Why would you think that it's strict to quote the scripture more often? Let's just think about that. But yes, it's very cookie cutter right now. There's nothing artistically novel about what's going on. It's about the strictest thing ever. You can predict it. It's going to start with, you know, a more, usually it kind of starts with a more high energy song, and then it kind of slows down, and then it ends up with it being a repetitive thing, because it's all done to achieve an effect. God inspires words today, doesn't he? This is an argument, you know, if you want to not use a song from the world, you know, from another group, you want to use a scripture song. Well, God's still inspiring words. Yeah, you're going to put King David on the same level as these people? That's a weird strategy. I'm not saying that, you know, there's inspiration going on to a certain extent, but canonization and poetry in the Bible is on a different level, and we should all realize that. That's a little bit strange. Nobody should want to canonize the lyrics of Hillsong. That doesn't make sense, and I don't think anybody really thinks that. So no, they're not equivalent. And like I said, what's the value? Why are you switching it? If you're switching it just so I can have watered down biblical metaphors, I don't understand. You should worship God, not the Bible. This is another one. This is where the rubber meets the road. You'll often get to this point, and that's because this is what it's about. It's about respect of the text, and it's about the fact that respecting the text in this instance is going to cost them the ability to do the worship the way they want, which is to do these repetitive songs with low theological content that are not challenging to the audience to get you into a trance-like state. It's as simple as that in many ways. Now, I'm giving a, what you call it, a reductive answer, right? Is that always what's going on 100% of the time? Of course not. But is that the general trend? Yes. Of course it is. It's what would scientifically make sense. It explains the whole situation, and it also explains the vitriol you get when you want to adjust things, because they know that by doing it you are going to create a different effect, and they're concerned that it will actually affect the relationship with God at this point to some extent, because they have married the two concepts. They have married the concept that this sort of interaction is actually critical to their relationship to God altogether. So it's a very serious issue to them, and that's why it's very difficult to unpack, because it ends up being quite a religious gap. It's a very different sort of way to have a relationship with God. It's a very different sort of way to treat what the corporate worship service should even be. It's a lot of these things. But it's something that needs to happen. It's a conversation you need to happen sooner rather than later, because I don't think this is going to get any better. These groups that are influencing the music are probably going to continue to slide in negative directions, considering their footing is not very stable, and so the content's going to get more and more dodgy. It's already pretty dodgy in terms of being, lacking obedience most of the time, and not implying that much of a change on your part and things like that, and weird metaphors and sexual metaphors that are bizarre, not like the one in the Psalms where it's a metaphor about, just like a man would do this. It's literally putting God in sexual sort of language. It's not good in many ways. It's very problematic, and when people bring it up, what's more problematic is the fact that the criticism of it being brought up is met with such a violent response, even when it's reasonably presented. And I certainly hope you found this reasonably presented. I've said some very strong statements that you might disagree with, but like I said, this does come from a place of concern. This comes from especially as we continue. This is one of those things, it's like the slippery slope argument. If you do not have a counter force, things generally get worse, right? And I don't see a counter force coming about this. I mean, in terms of, I feel like if you look at where the quality of lyrics went so fast, and if you look at the way that the world is emphasizing things like a lack of morality and a lack of clarity about morality, I should say specifically, I don't see why this is going to get any better. Something is going to have to give. So ultimately, I want to leave you with this question. This is a question that you should always ask. This is a good go-to, because this really tells you, if you're going to talk to a worship leader or anybody about this, this is a good go-to question. What is the advantage to earworm songs that really get into our head, that really, entrench us, that do not directly quote scripture? And I hope you appreciated this talk. Thank you very much.